Lost these days. We've got apps on our phone, we've got Google Maps, we've got sat-navs in our cars, and it's very hard for things to just happen by surprise and circumstance. So, and some of the best things that have happened to me in life have just been like by chance. So I wrote this one. But I also combined it with the sad loss of the fact that quite a few libraries, smaller libraries, are closing down recently, and that's partly, as we know, to do with cuts. But it's also about the fact that people don't want to read out of paper anymore, and they've got their e-books. So with those combined loves of getting lost and my love of getting lost in a library, I wrote this one called All Is Not Lost. The declaration startled me like the crash of bins once metal, a bungling burglar inept. We don't need libraries anymore. The e-book, its bright kindled glare, stamps on the dusky, dust-ridden paper tome. Louder, brassier, more alluring, seducing the onlooker with endless features and empty promise. Promises to give more, yet remain discreet. Options without commitment, more entertainment. The glassy-eyed, dull-eared ludulite packs more into its limitless pages, scented with an unfamiliar way. An electrochemical, cheap imitation of the real thing. No need to get lost in a library, letting eyes take gentle steps with a finger deliciously tracing over the spines of countless books on oak shelves. The hard upright, the quickie paperback, the glossy vibrant magazine, judging the book by its cover, now considered obsolete, abhorrent even. Long lost journeys for the soul mapped out in the temporary world of ether and ethereal. A press the button sat-nav rocketing you to an electric moon of a virtual and very disappointing reality. Thank you. One of my favourite things to do is be other characters. So I'm going to do one of my monologues. It's part of a 45-minute show, but I'm not going to impose that on you. It's quite an effort to do, let alone listen to it. So I'm going to do it up a little bit. My floor manager out there is just correcting the space. Better? What was I saying? Yeah, so this is a part of the show, and it's a 10-minute-ish part of the show, and it's about two characters, Shell and Chris, and it's the kind of up and downs of a contemporary relationship set in Southend-on-Sea, which is where I come from, and it's introduced and narrated by another chap called Chris. I'm not going to change my outfits, which I don't really do in the show anyway. I just change hats and glasses, but you know that the characters are different, hopefully, from the accents. So I'll start with Steve. Within this tale of love and betrayal, two star-crossed lovers setting sail, paths are crossed and pain is tossed to a fair wind that belies its humble beginnings and unfair winnings as Chris and Shell set sail from Southend-on-Sea to eternity. But the scenic route always carries its own challenge. Can these two, with all their baggage, learn to speak a mutual language, cast aside the crusty sandwich, replaced with something more substantive? A banquet befitting of a king and a queen and a sunset setting, where the feather spitting, ruthless splitting and the unremitting make way for something more attentive and ascensive, less ostensibly addictive. Simply put, can they get their ship together, sail the ship to fairer weather, or destroy the love they tether? Let's find out as they endeavour. We'll hear their version of events. They'll set it up as tall as tents, as wide as the sea they have embarked on. So for now I will not harp on. Let Chris and Shell hold court for now. Their cryptic version take the stage, a 4-part drama to persuade. And I will merely interject. As his best mate, I feel it fitting to stop the rot from firmly setting, for I am Steve. You'll hear me mentioned, the voice of reasoned intervention, as I am full of good intention. Best mate should relieve the tension. We start with Chris, a decent bloke. His thoughts are often softly spoke, but on this occasion he's wild like smoke. His voice becomes an angered choke. Chris, well, I was gutted, throated, kicked in the scrot. It'd been 2 long years since I'd seen her. She'd taken my heart to the cleaners, wrapped it round a lamppost and left me there for dead. And what she said, well, hard to believe. And that's how it seemed to Steve. I mean, he'd seen it coming. Something about a bloke from a chip shop, thought he was a big shot and tempted her with a Savoy, and not even battered. And me and her, we scattered. She always did love her food. I don't mean to be rude, but it's a choice between me or a night in with a bacon butty. She chose the sarnie every time. Slutty bread barmy she was. Well, you could put anything between the slice and she'd consume it. And the chip shop boy, well, he knew it, seeing her eyes light up by the gherkins, the jerk chicken, the pickled onions, her sweet lips licking, and his brain ticking like a time bomb. Well, I was sick and tired of trying to make it work. She could have the chicken jerk. His plan, though, backfired, because well, she was wired for something more than a fumble by the spuds, and now his heart a time bomb. Thuds. To those that don't understand, he had it coming. Not much to offer that bloke, and 2 sandwiches short of a toolbox. A total tool. And something about another girl that he'd smarmed himself across like Marmite. And love it or loathe it, she loved it. My girl, though, loathed it, despised and deplored it. She got out the claws. It was not a pretty sight, that fight. A murky mash-up, hot, sweaty brawl, and the tool stood there. Face like a slapped haddock. Total waddock. Had it coming, so when I heard word on the street that she wanted to meet, and she said it so sweet, I thought, shall I give her a taste of her own sweet medicine, or take her out from a dress in that new place in town? I thought I'd have it planned, be a man, stick the proverbial fingers up, but a bolty and an hand got the better of me in that plan. Went down the pan. Steve. Chris now painfully starts to see the roots of infidelity scratch deeper than a surface tension, based more on his poor intentions. Taking someone so for granted takes its toll as disenchanted he became, and so estranged. Simply put, he'd been an arse, and she could see all was a farce. Chris. Well, this is how it really started, how the rot set in and how the wheel began to spin. She had the washing in her hands, and I was sitting down. So I said, a woman's work is never done by a man. I quipped with my razor-like wit, and she looked at me like I was shit, like a half-wit or a total twit or a half-baked twat. To redeem myself, I encouraged her to sit. Let me do it, I said, lifting the load, and I could see her explode. At the line, so I pegged, like metaphorical, like I begged her forgiveness, my pride intact, well, in my head. But then she said, don't peg it like that. Once more the twat. It won't dry, innit? So I corrected her lazy grammar. It's ain't it, I retorted. And then her circuit shorted. I felt the hammer slamming down, just as I commented on her nans, and she did frown at me, the clown. Well, thou dost gone and done it now, I mentally made notes, and no more oats for you, my boy, where thou didst toy with me a little, whittled at my fraying ego. No more love for me, amigo. And like a volt or a clam, like a done-up pot of jam, she shut down and made her exit plan. Steve. Simply put, he'd been an arse, and she could see all was a farce. She had found solace with another. Sigh before was like a brother, but soon became her future lover. Yet, as you'll see, the grass so green is not always so on the other side, and soon she starts to realise some selfish traits within this guy, some dodginess he had belied. Let's get some water. Oh, it's a long old piece, isn't it? Shell. Relationships are strange things. You think you know someone and then they spring something on you. He said he'd been hiding something, he'd been changing, and I thought, what? Rearranging your wardrobe, you know, something in your closet, so to speak, but not 1,000 feet away from me. He'd been exchanging his basic instincts for something quite unlike him. So when he said he wanted to better himself, you know, lift himself from the metaphorical gutter, I thought, total nut has gone and got himself involved in something that he didn't know, you know, gone and bought a new lifestyle based on crime, and he'd be doing time involving himself with some unsavoury types from the estate and in-estate, stressing because, well, deep down he's a good bloke. And I met Si from the chip shop for a couple of years. We shared a couple of beers at the Swan and Gusset. Well, that's what we called it, because the skirts were shorter than they ought to be, and the blokes had their tongues literally by their knees. And he seemed different from the crowd, and he didn't say it loud, but he was a respecter of the female form. He didn't like girls to disrespect themselves. Disparage, was it? Or something that rhymed with garage. Anyway, not a typical bloke you'd expect to work in a chip shop. Well, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying you'd expect him to be dense, but sometimes, and I'm talking present tense, his intellect would be put to better use, say, in the teaching profession, because, well, his obsession was literary, well, books and stuff, and he'd had enough of life in the fast lane. He wanted a future not based on ill-gotten gains, nicking stuff from Poundland, pounding the streets, causing trouble. And his last girl had said, "Are you having a bubble? Know your place. You know your roots are on these streets, between the cracks in the pavements." But he wanted to grow, I suppose, metaphorically, into a sunflower and rise above the weeds of his past, make his previous misdemeanours his last. So he went to a night class. He learnt about a better way to get away from a past that haunted him, and his mates taunted him. Said he was a twat for doing something intellectual, and that his way was ineffectual. Well, that's not the word they used, but he knew what they meant. So he got himself some levels. English, sociology. She said it was all rubbish. Bollockology was the word she used, and he felt used, misunderstood and slightly confused. So I became his confidant. And he became more confident in his abilities, and he was ill at ease with his previous pattern, no longer a twat and able to think on his own 2 feet. And I respect a bloke like that. Risen up from his previous twathood into something so much more real. So I was really sure that I had to move on from Chris, because, well, something was, let's say, amiss in our relationship, and Si could see my growing disconcertion. And as he put it, there is nothing worse than a man who can't satisfy his woman, and I don't just mean in the bedroom department. He knew what a farce meant to me, and there is a vast difference between being in love and being in love with the idea of being in love. Time, however, weaves its own path, and the idea of being in love, well, changes. I admire the fact that Si seemed curious when it came to learning, but when it also came to women, that seemed a little more spurious. Fraudulo, epilo, lubrique, that's fraudulent, dodgy and lustful. See, I've been learning languages, and the language of love had been changing. Rearranging the law of averages, it seemed rather predictably and somewhat unsurprisingly, his time at university was a seat of learning for other activities, and he was well at ease with charming all the ladies with his grasp of aristocracies. That's Aristotle and all the others to you and me's, but in love it's 2s, not with 3s. With this I was ill at ease. Plato, Descartes, Confucius, Aquinas, it seemed he was more interested in ladies of all description. Of all description. And the only prescription for this was to take 3 at bedtime. I wasn't comfortable with that. His twathood had eclipsed his thirst for knowledge, and like a bowl of cold porridge, I could take it no more. I showed him the door, and more than that, he knew he'd lost the best thing, but love can't hang about waiting when the waiting would be fruitless. So yeah, it seemed ruthless at the time, but for now I'd be single and not ready to mingle. I'd find myself, find my faith, unshakable on that self-imposed shelf. And yeah, well, my shelf life became extended, but I would grow to be the woman that I could be, with the past, like a sack of drowned kittens, firmly behind me. Now, if that analogy upsets you, then think how hard it is to let go of fond memories, and you'll sympathise with my position. Give me permission to use its cruel imagery. I never promised to be a visionary. So when Chris turned up on my door, begging for one more chance, I surprised myself with what, on first glance, seemed a somewhat hasty stance, a response that even I could not have predicted in the warm light of day, but in a strange and crooked way, his eyes taught me more than any verbal rhetoric ever could. I then understood the changes he had made had been for the better. Our paths had merged once more, and with that thought, the end of a bitterly cold war and the start of a future restored. Men always like to have the last word, don't they? Right?
Indeed.
Okay, all right. Chris, final fronting. Yeah, well, she'd always been a cheerful giver, but she'd sold our love right down the river, sold it to the highest bidder. Then she thought she'd reconsider. She said a ring would pave the way, a band of gold to make her stay, but at the time I was less than sure. With that thought, I'd shut the door. My views were thus. With this ring, I thee stitch you up like a kipper. Kill me now, it's so much quicker. Me no more, the witty quipper. Pass the bucket, I'm feeling sicker. But where there's hope, there is a flicker. We talked it through and reconsidered. More to lose in ones than twos. Coupled thus the time you choose. So down the aisle whisper read the news. I could see the answer in her eyes. She probably thought I was having a pop or having a bubble at her infidelities. But I was all sincerity at my request. I did bequest a hand in marriage, well, minus the fairy tale golden carriage. My Ford Fiesta would be spruced and suitably induced for such an occasion as this. My simple thought had been the object and my reason in the lyrics of our favourite song. If you like it, then you better put a ring on it. And so we did. She said, I do. No golden carriage, nor glass slipper. Let her win the row, it's quicker. Our wedding day, a lavish affair. Our big fat gypsy stylings. Well, her dress was like a Christmas tree. I was well glad I'd said, please marry me. And as her fake tan faded fast upon our sheets, just like our past, we washed it clean and drew a pact, straying done with staying tat. Now, chip shop bloke now up in Smokey's Marmite girl was up the duffer, not by him, she'd had enough. But me and her, our future mapped by a common divisor, a bun in the oven, and we're so much wiser. Our little one cleared the way, and now I'm thinking happy days. It's been emotional. Thank you.
Thank you.